OpenUK is not a name I chose, I'll start by saying, but it does describe what we do in some way. We focus on people. There's all sorts of people here. And we see people coming here because they want to be part of that ecosystem. They want to be somewhere they speak English because a lot of the work they do around open source is English. They want to be somewhere where there's a sort of hub and community of people doing this stuff, but they don't want to live in the US. And I guess that will increase and increase. It is very quickly become clear to me that most people who talk about this stuff don't know what they're talking about either. Nobody who knows what they're talking about will ever say it's an open source license. So at the point of launch, what went wrong was Mark Zuckerberg called it open source. And the reason it's open innovation, not open source, is that the license would never meet the requirements of the open source definition of open source software. Nobody can recite the 10 points of that definition, but what you need to think about is that anyone can use the code for any purpose. So there's no friction, there's a free flow in the licensing and sharing of the base that you're looking at. And with the Llama license, it has a commercial restriction and an acceptable use policy. And what those do to the licensing structure and the use is they create friction. So you can't rely when you take it that you can give it the way we do with open source, and you have this cascading free flow. And even the name, when we started this conversation with OpenAI, you went, oh, I don't mean OpenAI. What do I mean? So I use AI openness because I don't want to fight about what open source means in the context of AI. And the approach we advocate for is disaggregating the component parts of the AI.
Hello and good morning. Amanda, how are you doing today?
Really well, thank you. Thank you for having me along.
It wasn't easy. Getting time with you turned out to be the most challenging aspect, but I'm really glad that we're doing this. So for anybody who hasn't heard of Amanda, CEO of OpenUK, notorious speaker. I think that's fair to say. Notorious. I see you speaking basically all the time. And Computer Weekly, I had to choose just some of the things on your long resume and a lot of the hats that you've worn over the years. Computer Weekly, 50 most influential women in tech. And that sounds pretty grand. Thanks for coming on this.
No, thank you.
Let's jump straight in. So I think a lot of people who are like me, software engineers, maybe SREs, have seen the logo around. OpenUK, it sounds pretty official. It sounds like a government body or something. And probably have heard you speak about the three open things, the hardware, the software, and the data, and I guess increasingly open AI. Yeah, I just realized open AI.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And they have a trademark.
Exactly. Those things are hard. So
yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you guys are actually doing day to day, other than looking cool and having your logo all over the place?
OpenUK is not a name I chose, I'll start by saying, but it does describe what we do in some way. We are effectively a unique organization, and we do two or three things, which in other countries, multiple organizations do. So we are an industry body. We bring together as much as we can the open source ecosystem and industry. As anybody who works in this space will know, that is a massive challenge because the ecosystem is very fragmented. It's made up of lots of different elements, whether that's business, whether it's individual contributors. So it's quite a hard thing to bring together. And when you run a geographical organization, what you find is that people know each other globally, but not locally. Great example, I actually ended up on a panel with a lady who used to live 6 doors from me. I had no idea she lived anywhere near me or even in London, but we are both in the same space and work a lot in that, and we interacted with each other internationally because we're part of that global collaboration. So what we seek to do is to bring together the local geography of people based in the UK. Doesn't matter where they work or who they work for, we try to bring them together and represent their interests. And the way we do that is we run community events. We have a recognition program where we do things like awards and honors, do case studies to showcase that UK-based community, a lot of whom come from all over the world, but who live here in the UK. It's almost an accident in many cases that they live here. Now, we don't focus on companies, we focus on people. And the other industry organizations in other countries focus on companies. If you focus on companies, you end up with a small group of companies who are based out of your country. Particularly in the UK, we see the companies that we have evolving, getting invested in from the US, becoming US companies, or even being sold to the US. So I don't care where you work, who you work for, so long as you live in the UK. And if you live in the UK, we bring you into our ecosystem if we can. It's free to join. It's not a pay-to-play organization in the spirit of open source. We're funded through sponsorship, through some government grants and philanthropic monies. And we do this engagement of community, and then we do legal and policy work. So this morning, I've been on a call with a bunch of lawyers who know about open source. They're all based in the UK, looking at a response to a consultation on standard essential patents, a FRAND licensing, which can break the free flow of open source. So we do that sort of legal stuff to try and make sure we have good laws here that work with openness. And then we do policy initiatives. And that can be a really broad range of things. I'm going to the Labour Party conference this weekend. I've actually got NVIDIA and Nscale on a panel with me on Sunday talking about sovereignty and what sovereignty means, how that works for the UK, how it's working for the rest of the world, and where open source fits in it, because there's a lot of friction around that. So we have this really broad-ranging organization that's unique and tries to bring people together in the UK and give them a voice in policy and law.
How did it start? Like that sounds like a pretty ambitious mission.
It is. It's a very broad mission, but we succeed quite a lot and we are tiny. Around 2010, I was working at Canonical and the Cabinet Office in the UK owned the software infrastructure at that time. GDS was just being formed. And a group of people in open source were brought into the Cabinet Office to be advisors. As a result of that advisory group, we have a UK open source first policy in the public sector, which is still in force in theory. So that group of people continued to meet for many years, and I had nothing to do with it. And at around 2018, they started to talk to me. I was still a lawyer, but I wanted to change. And I've been a lawyer for 25 years, and that's a long sentence. So I was really happy pivoting away from it, but didn't know what I wanted to do. The one thing I'd brought from my career was I really love open source. I was approached to run OpenUK and to build it, and I said no. And I said no because I work internationally, and I have done since 2000, and I had no interest in the UK. So it's a bit of an oxymoron that I ended up running the UK organization. The reason I took it on was I saw that what Brexit meant was that the focus the UK people had on collaboration was Europe, was the EU, and we were going to be cut adrift. And that was a bit of foresight on my part that I was right about.
Maybe let's not go that way right away.
Ask the people. There's your answer.
Yeah, that is fascinating. But I was going to ask, because if you wanted to start a company, I don't know, called British Steel, a terrible example, you probably need some kind of nod from the government, right? So that makes sense now. That
I don't think you do, actually.
You don't?
I don't. We've got a trademark in OpenUK, and we don't have anybody's approval to use that. I don't think we need to speak to a trademark lawyer, but I don't think you need a country designation. There's our company secretary at OpenUK actually is a domain name and trademark guy and worked years ago on the Champagne case where they have is it marque de nomination? A designation from an area like Parma ham or Champagne.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think they have that on anything that has a country name. It's interesting though. It's a good point. I hope we're not in trouble. Don't.
Interesting. Tell me about the State of the Open.
Yeah, it is a truly unique conference and represents the breadth of what we do at OpenUK. So we bring together a cross-section of people and they come from open technology. All of our work is about open tech, not open source software. So we do software, hardware, data. Because we're only 5-6 years old, when we set up, we knew that you have to bring those together. You can't do software without data in this day and age. We've not expanded that, but we've clarified that it also covers AI and standards because people get confused. So State of OpenCon brings together those disciplines and different aspects of it. So the people who were there were pretty niche. They're academics, software engineers, developers, technical people around those areas, business people, so enterprise, public sector, the whole shebang, the intersection of policy, business, technology comes together. And we get about 800 people each year. Very diverse group. We're unusual and we're not a diversity project, but I think having a female-led organization, open source, is relatively rare. And we happen to have a lot of strong female leaders in the UK across open source. So we attract naturally a broader group than most do. It's a 2-day conference. We have plenaries that bring in the conversations that are happening behind closed doors across the globe that are relevant to this space and open them up to everybody who's there so that they build understanding. And then we run a bunch of tracks. But it is a really fun conference. We don't allow anyone to pay for content, which makes it hard to raise the funding and to organize. But it means that we have some of the best content you're going to get. And because it's early in the year, next year it's on the 3rd and 4th of February, straight after FOSDEM, it means that it sets an agenda, it sets a conversation that tends to follow through the rest of the year.
That makes sense. And I didn't make it this year, but I'm hoping to go next year.
You can definitely come and bring your podcast. We have loads of people there doing social media stuff and YouTubers and podcasters. That'd be great.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you, and please don't kill me if that's like an easy Google, but I couldn't find it. Are you familiar with the CNCF landscape? They published this like massive thing for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation.
Yeah,
you guys do something like that?
No, we don't. That kind of catalogue almost. The Commission has it. The UK doesn't have it. We do have a public sector platform called G-Cloud. But no, I've not seen anything like that done for the UK, and we've never looked at doing it, to be honest. I think there's a sort of piece there where we are so global in what we do, and we don't necessarily focus. If you told me a project was a UK project, I don't know that I would necessarily think it was. So for us, how would we divide it? Would you want us to build a catalogue of all open source? I would just point you at other people's catalogues. CNCF landscape. Do you want one that's UK, where you need to look at the kind of thing Eurostack is doing, which is about sovereignty? That means the code has to be local. And that's not really where we operate from. We believe in global collaboration.
Yeah. I guess I was coming at a question from trying to understand what the UK open source landscape actually looks like, because you would probably be forgiven for thinking that it's super heavily dominated, like the global landscape, by like US, maybe increasingly China and places like that. And I couldn't name too many projects or companies that would go on the UK.
I think that's really fair. And I think what we have is an interesting position. So when you look at the EU, and we tend to use data that we can get from GitHub or GitLab, Hugging Face doesn't cut things well geographically, which is unfortunate. When you look at the data, and we're at least comparing, like the UK is number 1 in Europe in terms of number of open source contributing engineers and the number of lines of code contributed. And we're by far number 1. Germany's number 2, France is number 3, France is fastest growing. That pattern's existed for many years, but France's growth has accelerated in the last few years because of the work that Macron has really done around open source. If you look at the UK by number of GitHub accounts, we've got over 4 million, which is not huge compared to somebody like India, where they've got about 14 million. But we have 6.1% of our population on the last available data. That's higher than any country in the world. When we do our honors lists, we don't ask people to apply. We go and we mine data, and we mine data in the UK more than I think any country does. There were over 123,000 individuals maintaining open source projects in the UK at the start of this year. But they're small projects. They are international projects. I don't think we try to own projects as being UK. So if I said to you, have you heard of AutoGPT?
AutoGPT.
Okay, so AutoGPT is the fastest growing open source repository in the world. It's an AI agent. It was written by a guy called Torin who lives in Scotland. And it was written within a month of ChatGPT 4. Lovable's built on top of it. Yeah, so we don't necessarily, when we create open source, think nationally. And then I think when you look at AutoGPT, I can't remember exactly how many employees they have now, but they're global. And it's just that the founder happens to live in the UK. And I think that's an essential part of understanding open source. So what we've tried to do is identify projects, identify people, and we realized that you really have to focus on the people. And you have like Alexis Richardson, who was the first chair of the technical advisory board at CNCF. You've got Liz Rice, who was also a chair. People like Paula Kennedy, platform engineering queen. There's all sorts of people here. And we see people coming here because they want to be part of that ecosystem. They want to be somewhere they speak English, because a lot of the work they do around open source is English. They want to be somewhere where there's a sort of hub and community of people doing this stuff, but they don't want to live in the US. And I guess that will increase and increase. I don't want to get too political, but if things continue the way they do, I suspect we'll see more of an influx of people wanting to be part of that close to EU or European based ecosystem around open source, speaking English.
Is that primarily a question of funding? As in, if the money is in the US, people put up with a lot of other things. But then if the funding improves in Europe, that gives people more option to be more opinionated?
I think that what we see is a talent flight and a shift in our businesses when they get to a certain point. And it's not that funding isn't available, it's that the terms in the US are better generally. And they're better because the US market, A, takes more risks, and B, understands open source better. And you have a proximity of people in 2 areas in the US, maybe 3. You're not looking at the whole US. You're looking at a few hubs where there are universities teaching people the right stuff, where there is a bunch of people living who work in that same space and understand that space. And that encourages more to go into it. We did a report 2 years ago where we actually interviewed a lot of people in the Bay Area, a lot of them expats, about why they'd gone there. So, though he's not British, we spoke to Solomon at Docker. We spoke to a guy called Tom Drummond, who is the founder of Heavybit, a VC, which does a lot of work in open source. And what they said is you have this, it's almost like a magnet that draws people to that area because it's willing to take risks. It expects failure. Failure is a big taboo here in the UK. If you haven't failed as a founder, they think you haven't lived, right? You haven't learned. So there's a cultural shift. There's a number of vectors or things that bring these people together in that space. But funding is critical, and it's not just the availability, it's the terms in which you get it.
That makes sense. I want to, time conscious, move to surprise AI. I think for a lot of people, maybe the open source question wasn't as important until rubber hit the road and all of a sudden everybody and their pet dog realized that this AI thing is big and it's important to have models that come the right conditions and the right data. And it's probably not a good idea to have the potential dystopian future when we have 2 companies far away that control all of that. What are you doing about that on the UK scale?
So we've been advocating for openness in AI for 2.5, 3 years. We, and I personally, avoided AI because to me, AI and cybersecurity, you really have to know your shit, right? You have to know what you're talking about. And they're very technical, very detailed. And that wasn't my sphere of understanding. And it's very quickly become clear to me that most people who talk about this stuff don't know what they're talking about either. That's possibly partly because it's evolving. And I say either, hopefully I do know what I'm talking about because I won't generally talk about something I don't know. We worked with Meta in 2023 as they were launching Llama 2. And you went from Llama having been given to academics and leaked to a formal license, which is not an open source license. Nobody who knows what they're talking about will ever say it's an open source license. So we'd read the license, we'd read the AUP, and we partnered on launch. And their website was very clear in calling it open innovation. So at the point of launch, what went wrong was Mark Zuckerberg called it open source. And the reason it's open innovation, not open source, is that the license would never meet the requirements of the open source definition of open source software. Nobody can recite the 10 points of that definition, but what you need to think about is that anyone can use the code for any purpose. So there's no friction, there's a free flow in the licensing and the sharing of the base that you're looking at. And with the Llama license, it has a commercial restriction and an acceptable use policy. And what those do to the licensing structure and the use is they create friction. So you can't rely when you take it that you can give it the way we do with open source and you have this cascading free flow. There's going to at some point be a break in that ability to just use and share. And what it does for Meta is it effectively means that whoever wins, if somebody gets to the 7 million users, which is the commercial licensing point, they have to go back to Meta and pay a commercial license, and Meta gets money from that. So it's not true open source, but we backed it, and I didn't make the decision on my own. I got my full board to vote on it, and they were unanimous. We backed it, and we were the only open source organization that did because it was a shift in the right direction. We felt it was important to see code open up. Now, to go back to your question, there's like 8 companies in the world that really do open source, right? We're seeing them owned by billionaires. We're seeing them not being in Europe, a couple in China, the rest in the US. And your challenge is that if they are not open, you cannot access what they're giving you. So what we need, if we want the ability to innovate on top, the ability to compete in the future, and the ability to have security and to provide services, whether it's through public sector or enterprise that are safe and secure for our citizens, is to be able to access the code. So for me, there's a lot of conversation now about sovereignty in the tech stack and sovereignty in AI. I try not to use that word because I think it's a loaded term. By its nature, it's aggressive because it's talking about something that's here, me, not you. And with Brexit, we learned a lot about that. I'm not a fan of me, not you. I'm a fan of collaboration cross border. So for me, if you want to protect people, you want access. We can't change history. And I've been in the tech sector over 30 years. There are decisions that were made around allowing companies to grow 30 years ago, 25 years ago after the dot-com boom that wouldn't have been made if they'd understood A would lead to B, would lead to C, would lead to D. We can't go back and change that. But what we can fix is the go forward. And what we're trying to do is make sure that people understand what open source is, how it works, and how that generates the values of openness in a landscape where it's in people's interest to spread. In the old days of the operating system wars, we called FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They're not fear mongering so much. What they're doing is creating confusion about what openness means. And even the name, when we started this conversation with OpenAI, and you went, oh, I don't mean OpenAI. What do I mean? So I use AI openness because I don't want to fight about what open source means in the context of AI. And the approach we advocate for is disaggregating the component parts of the AI. I don't think you can define AI. I think you can define something like an open model, and you can look at what's open source, it's well established, and you can say, okay, what other aspects are there that make this open? I think the bit that we've been missing and that's really critical is understanding data. And what we want to see is data sets that are open, that can be scraped, that can be used in training. And you want to see that maybe on a reciprocal basis. I'm letting you have all of my data on condition that you do it back. And it's almost like a copyleft approach to data sharing in AI. And I think that's what's going to end up evolving and happening. And we need some form of de facto standard, like a Kubernetes equivalent around that to evolve.
Isn't that a little bit like going to someone during the gold rush and telling them, hey, share your techniques, be more open?
Yes.
It's a little bit...
Yeah, it is. But when you have a market that's this closed, if you don't do it, you are going to end up with a seriously damaged economic and, I guess, social infrastructure.
Is there a role for the governments to play here? Like, why is there not a government lab that would build some of the base models?
I won't remember the numbers because I could have gone and looked them up if I'd known we were going to talk about this. But the EU put together a 3-year package on AI, and it was less than Meta alone spent in a year. So we just don't have the scale. The money just isn't there. So what we have to do is take what we can and build on it. And that's what you're seeing happening. What governments need to do is make sure that the use cases of the AI are protected. So that generally has an impact in a regulated sector. So finance, healthcare, telecommunications, things that have an ombudsman and a regulatory infrastructure. Those need to be checked to make sure that AI, which is just another technological tool really, is covered appropriately for those use cases. And those are the higher risk use cases, which is why they're regulated. And then we need to build awareness and enterprise and consumer users so they become sophisticated users. And the way they've become on the internet is taking time, and it will take time with AI, but we'll see that shift. The challenge is that we've allowed these big companies to be the only people in the world who are able to invest at the scale that's necessary to compete. And if we allow that to be totally locked down, we can't create any security, any safety, any resilience for our people. And that's, to me, where the access point becomes critical. So I was at the Paris AI Action Summit, the Global Leaders Summit in February, and I'm going to the Indian one next February. And what is a shift from action in Paris to impact? They really want to know what the impact of this global governance will be. and they're looking at it in the global south. So they're saying, we're hosting this for the world here in India. We want to see access for all. And I think we have to remember that it's not just the UK, it's not just Europe. We're looking at this for the global landscape for the future. And we need to ensure that this is our critical infrastructure. I watched Jensen Huang at NVIDIA. I can never say his name properly. I've probably just missaid that, with President Macron in Paris at Viva Tech. And it was like a rock star stage. It was absolutely buzzing. And they're talking with Mistral about an industrial AI cloud. They're talking about they were using sovereignty as a term, but they were talking about intelligence, and they were talking about safety and security, like Secret Service intelligence, but also about culture and language. And what we have to have is access to the underlying technology so that we can, in the case of a model, train it in that local intelligence. And if we don't have the access, we have huge problems. And that's why back in January, when DeepSeek launched R1, and suddenly you had an environment that took the cost of an LLM down to 5% of what it had been, we see the market shake. NVIDIA's response to that has been a blinder over the last 6 months, I have to say. Commercially, they are superb. But when you look back at DeepSeek and you see the evolution there, what it showed the world is if you have a low-cost open solution, what that brings is adoption and innovation on top of it. So actually, the big techs have an advantage to being the creator of these open solutions. And when we look at open source software, one of the keys, even Mongo, who shifted away from open source a long time ago, even their founder who described it as a marketing tool, even somebody like that recognizes the power of open source to allow adoption at scale. And that's what you enable by opening it up. If you look across the big techs, they all use open source. They don't do it because they want to sing Kumbaya around the campfire with us true believers. They do it.
Oh, wait, it's not that?
Oh, I'm so sorry to break the news. They do it because of shareholder value, and that shareholder value is accentuated by the use of open source and the adoption it brings and that de facto standard it can create. Sorry, I know we're over time and I'm rambling on, but I think it's an important topic.
No, it 100% is. Yeah, I'm trying to be conscious of your time. I have a feeling I'm going to have to invite you again to talk more about some of that stuff. But it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for finding the time for this. And I obviously can't let you off the hook without some wild prediction on something. What do you think is going to happen to agentic AI in like the mid-future?
Oh, agentic. Interesting. The summer has seen so much change and swarms and agentic and MCP. What do I think is going to happen? You know, if I knew what was going to happen, I would be off running a business to make a lot of money. The answer to that one, I suspect we'll see the market calm over time. It's the same cycle of hype that if you look back over the last 25 years, you see again and again, something comes out, it's innovative, it's groundbreaking. Everybody wants to jump on it. And then everybody realizes, okay, that's not quite serving my purpose because it's not mature enough. I think it's going to have a huge impact over time on coding and software engineering. And I think it will have a huge impact over time on the administrative processes that we all go through, some of which will make our lives easier and some of which will make us need more highly skilled individuals who can review and manage what it's doing. And I think you'll also see the whole security piece around identity become more and more critical to organizations and embed into standard practices around security.
Yeah, I saw this meme today about MCP and how everybody was queuing to build them, and for now, nobody was queuing to use them.
Exactly one of the policy conversations we're going to be having is return on investment. Right now, there is no return on investment. Does that mean it's a hype cycle that's going to totally crash? Probably not, but having been through the dot-com boom, you have the natural lull afterwards as people realize that it's going to take a bit more time for this to embed across the ecosystem and for it to be mature enough to actually do things in a way that creates a return. There's just so much money going to so few people right now. It is quite an interesting situation.
Oh yeah, and the nominals are crazy.
Yeah.
You don't hear a trillion there. It's just nuts.
I know. And just trying to understand how that affects everybody's economy and everybody's life, because it is a unique bubble. But I suspect if I could go back to 2000 when I was working in ISP, or if we could go back in time to the Dutch, the black tulips and the bubble there, you probably see a similar feeling. It's just more accentuated into that small group now than we've ever seen it before. So yeah, we
100%.
need to talk about it another time.
Amanda Brock, everybody, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.